Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Many thanks for being here. My name is John O'Sullivan, and I am the president of the Danube Institute, but I play the most extraordinarily anonymous and modest role today because it's my pleasant duty to welcome you and then to hand over to the people who are really the important figures in this event. I just have to tell you a little about the Danube Institute, simply because this event is rather unusual for us. We are here as an institute which is an attempt to create a forum for conservative and classical liberals to debate issues of every kind, and also to debate with our democratic opponents on the left. We have a second duty, which is to try to persuade. I should say that where we plant our flag is emblazoned with the ideas that we are conservatives in historical and cultural questions. We tend to be classical liberals in economic questions, and in foreign policy we are Atlanticists. Now, as I say, that's our flag, and we debate those ideas with other people. We also have an obligation and a duty, I must say, to encourage debate and argument in this country, of course, but also throughout Central Europe, and we have had conferences in Poland and the Czech Republic, and we will have other conferences in other countries of Central and Eastern Europe. We finally are attempting to create a transmission belt of ideas and people between Central Europe on the one hand and Western Europe and the other, but also the English-speaking world, the Anglosphere, namely Britain, and the United States and Australia and Canada. Because, again, we think we have some things in this part of the world to say to them, and we think we can also benefit from hearing their experiences in policy and other things. So what we're doing is, so to speak, I hope lively and interesting, but it's sort of serious. Today I wouldn't attach, at least don't intend, to attach those words to this event. The words for this event I would choose are celebration on the one hand and heartwarming on the other, because they are built around a very simple but new word, which I'm not sure I will at all pronounce effectively, but nonetheless it means, I'm told, remigrant, namely somebody who is re-emigrating to this country. And we're discussing the experience, the achievements, and the advice, I think, too, of those people who were either left this country to go abroad during the communist years or earlier, and those people who and have come back since, or in many cases, of course, on the platform, people who are actually born abroad, but born into families that were determined to retain their Hungarian culture and life, learnt Hungarian, and remained immersed, first of all, themselves in Hungarian culture, but then spread that Hungarian culture to other people and created the important Hungarian diasporas, which were particularly, of course, revived and enthused by people in 1956, but have continued to be an important link between Hungary and the rest of the world. And it's one of the reasons I think that we're here, because Hungarians, we find, are welcoming people. They've welcomed us. We've been very happy at the 5 years we've been here. So it's very helpful, very pleasant for us to be able to hold an event of this kind, particularly one which begins with the music we've just heard, which I simply love, and it's really a great pleasure to hear it here. So thank you very much. Now, this is not our event solely, of course. Indeed, we're only half of it. The other half is the Friends of Hungary. But we're very fond of the Friends of Hungary. Until recently, they shared our offices here. And they're a bunch, among other things, of very lively, youthful, clever people who helped us in various ways, and particularly Ursula Karlachai, who is here. Ursula, you should really stand up and take a bow. Some of you will know, but not all, that the Friends of Hungary do a number of things. They produce a marvelous review of what's in the press about Hungary, which goes out all over the world, and that's every week and maybe more frequently. But the other thing is that they hold some marvelous conferences, both conferences for members of the Friend of Hungary to bring them here. And by the way, what a distinguished group of people those emigrants are who come on those occasions. It's a great pleasure for us to host them partly. And secondly, they hold conferences in which they bring journalists here to get an accurate picture of the situation rather than the, frankly, rather foolish interpretation of what's going on here in much of the international press. That's not to say there aren't things wrong. There are things wrong in every country. But the picture given of Hungary abroad is really libelous, in my view. And what they do is they tell the truth. And they then let the chips fall where they may. So I think the Friends of Hungary play a really important part in keeping alive the links between Hungarians abroad and this very distinguished group of people. And I'm only going to introduce one of them. He will introduce the others. But he is the inventor of the word. I'm very reluctant to pronounce Hungarian words because it just makes Hungarians laugh. But now where is it here again? Visszidensek. It's not very good at all. You're being very nice. But this is the basic idea we're looking at, exploring and celebrating tonight. I'm going to introduce the man who invented the word and has invented many other things. He's a distinguished Brazilian Hungarian. He is a distinguished. He was a distinguished businessman. His engineering tools company was the second largest one in the world. But he's been an active member of promoting Hungarian cultural life in Brazil. He founded 2 Hungarian folk dancing groups, and one of them for seniors. That sounds a really interesting idea. I may get a few tips on you for that. Anyway, he moved back to Hungary in 1997 and has developed his company promoting links between the 2 countries. I'm not going to say a great deal more because he will tell you himself what the ideas he's promoting are. I'm now going to slide quietly into the wings and listen while this conference goes on. So, Gabor Juritska, may I ask you to take over? Thank you.
Well, hello everybody. I hope we have a nice evening tonight. My first question to you, I ask all of you to, in about 1.5 hours, to turn your phones back on. Please turn them off now, and in about 1 hour, 1.5 hours, then you can turn them back on. Well, we have some nice friends here, and we also have some Visszidensek who are not at the table. We have Mr. Kálmán Magyar, and we have Mr. György Szelei. Please stand up, the 2 of you, good friends, Visszidensek as well. And just a few words about this whole idea so that we can start this round table, which is not round. From the second half of the 19th century until the last decade of the 20th century, there were 6 smaller or larger Hungarian migratory waves. The first wave was from 1849 to 1867. Due to the political persecution, and it began shortly after the failure of the 1848 insurrection, which aimed to fight the domination of the Habsburgs. These persecutions lasted until the signing of the 1867 commitment. Nearly all Hungarians of this movement emigrated to the United States. We're talking about maybe hundreds of families, not thousands, but maybe Kálmán could help me. About maybe 1,000 people went to the United States. The second biggest wave, and the biggest migratory wave, started in 1868 and goes until 1929. It was caused by economic factors, since the same 1867 commitment established unsustainable economic conditions for the rural population. This led to the exodus of a large contingent of farmers. The Treaty of Trianon of 1920 only made matters worse. This wave, which, if we count, it's almost 60 years, took to about 2 million people left Hungary to United States, Canada, Brazil, Argentina, Australia, and so forth. The third wave is from 1930 to World War II. This was due to political, philosophical, and existential reasons that predominated during this migratory wave, and basically it was composed of intellectuals and artists, people belonging to the bourgeoisie, and Jewish families who feared Nazi persecution. The fourth wave was from World War II until 1949. The power takeover by the Communist Party in 1948 created the nefarious conditions of this wave. A shortage of economic resources added to these adverse political circumstances. Then, for 6 or 7 years, there was no immigration because of the Iron Curtain. Then the fifth wave was in 1956 and 1957. The Hungarian Revolution of October 1956 generated an intense political repression which caused tens of thousands to flee the country. And the sixth wave, we consider as the sixth wave, started in 1989. And I put here the year 2000, but in reality, it's even today. The opening of the Hungarian borders after the extinction of the USSR and the country joining the European Union caused a certain exodus during this period because the Hungarian youth wanted better job opportunities in the UK and in Germany, just to mention the two larger destinations. We're talking about 200 to 300,000 people, youngsters, are living now in London and German cities. So this is what we consider as the sixth migratory wave. Hopefully, these young people will come back. In short, these migratory waves were strongly motivated by economic reasons resulting from previous political mistakes, or exclusively by political reasons. People belonging to all of these migratory waves, especially those motivated by economic reasons, had a common dream: to make a fortune in distant lands and return to the mother country in better financial conditions. A dream also cherished by those dissidents who, though far from their origins, continued to cultivate their Hungarian identity, recreating in their new homelands the cultural environment they inherited from their ancestors through Hungarian schools, folk dancing groups, scouting, cultural associations, and so on. These activities allowed even the second or third descendant generations to remain somewhat familiar with Hungarian culture. Those unfavorable economic and political conditions that promoted the Hungarian diaspora for more than a century seemingly have been reversed, and the country entered the 21st century showing a sustained growing movement, living under an independent democratic system, which gradually came to mean an attractive alternative for those who once walked the path of emigration. This positive picture, it seems, aroused the interest of the Hungarian dissidents for their former motherland. Despite having created new roots in their countries of adoption, those who have never ceased to nourish their Hungarian spirit even abroad, this Hungarian spirit is called magyarság in Hungarian, begun to see concrete opportunities for a reunion. And those living here in the motherland also became interested in the social, cultural, economic, and scientific achievements of the dissidents, those distant relatives who lived around the world but still nurtured the traditions of their ancestors. These groups started to take interest in each other, mutually discovering each other, so to speak, and the desire to strengthen ties between the Hungarians living in the mother country and the Hungarians in the diaspora naturally woke up. One of the outcomes of this mutual interest was, for example, an organization called the Friends of Hungary Foundation. Very briefly, this foundation aims to create a more comprehensive and accurate public image of both Hungary and Hungarians, regardless of where they live in the world, as a bridge linking Hungarian public and academic personalities and their peers living abroad, those who also feel proud of being Hungarian. As the foundation president says, they are informal ambassadors of our country and improve the reputation of Hungary. As part of its achievements, a rather sui generis book was published by the foundation in December of last year, entitled Visszidensek, the blue one, a neologism using the words vissza and dissidens, which means visszidens, or back dissidents or remigrants, referring to people who migrated back to Hungary. The second volume has just been published a few weeks ago, and the numbers tell me that it will be as successful as the first one. The second volume is the green one. The author of the book, Péter Gyurica, we share the same surname, but we are not related, we're only good friends, is an experienced journalist and a university professor specialized in communication. He structured the format of the two books in interviews, but not in half a dozen equal questions for all interviewees. On the contrary, he conducts each interview in a unique way, extracting an individual picture of each person, but considering the whole picture, conveying a life experience in which every Hungarian immigrant can recognize himself. These two volumes depict the history of 24 Visszidens who came back to live in Hungary after the system change. The author not only reveals the trajectory of their return, but also shows under what conditions they lived in Hungary before immigration, how they were forced to leave the country, a panorama of their immigrant lives, the way they faced the contact with other cultures, how they recreated or reinvented their lives abroad, and the way they managed to preserve their Hungarianness, a central element of the book's subject. Some of them, as we learned from the books, helped to rebuild Hungary after the system change, both in economic and diplomatic activity. Examples of successful Hungarians in their second homelands. Nowadays, these people actively participate in the new democracy. Please welcome our four guests of today: Keve Pop, Árpád Szőci, Baron Antal Liptai, and Frido Dipövin. I asked Mr. Árpád Szőci, a good friend of mine, to start.
This is set up because I wanted to show you a video that I did. I'm also an investigative reporter. I graduated from the School of Journalism at Ryerson University in Toronto, and I worked my way up in the business. I was first a print journalist, and then I became a researcher at one of the major networks in Canada, and then was promoted to producer. And then in 1994, I won the President's Award at CBC Television, Canada's state television network, as the best producer on the noon hour show, Midday. About three of us would win the President's Award annually. It involved money plus a letter, and you weren't allowed to tell anybody that you won it because I was told it will create friction within the units. And so when I finally told them goodbye, I'm moving to Europe in 1996, they had a dinner for me, and I said, now I'm going to stand up and tell you something. I wasn't allowed to, and I'm looking at my boss, who's also Hungarian, Eva Ziegler, and I said, Eva, now I'm going to tell them. And she goes, go ahead. And I said, I won the President's Award. And so they were fine. They weren't mad or jealous or anything like that. So a Hungarian won the President's Award, best producer at CBC Television for 1994. And then in 1996, I won the Goethe Scholarship. The Goethe Institute in Canada allowed for one scholarship per year to study anywhere in Germany where there's a Goethe Institute. I chose Freiburg. German's my mother language. I come from what we call a mixed family. My mother's Austrian. She had a German father. And the other side is Transylvanian, Hungarian, and Bajai Magyar, Hungarian from Baja. And both cultures were in the family. But the first language was German. My father was a businessman, and he was constantly on the move in Canada. And so my mother would speak to me in her native tongue. That created many problems because I wasn't quite sure where I was. I remember the first day of, my mother told me the story. I don't remember it. She told me it. She said the first day of kindergarten, she asked me, how was it? I was in Winnipeg at the time, in central Canada. And I said, look, it's nice, but all the kids are so stupid. And she goes, why? She goes, because nobody can speak German. I didn't know where I was. It took a while to comprehend that. And then I first time in my life I ever encountered racism, not necessarily with me, but there was one black child in that kindergarten year. And I was just a friendly kid, and I had a toy horse, and I gave it to him one day. And the next day, he comes with his mother, and I remember looking up at her like that, and she's staring down at me like that. And I thought, oh God, I'm in trouble. And she goes, that's the nicest thing anyone ever did for us. So I realized that being black is not the easiest thing. And I didn't like injustice. So my father would often talk to me about Trianon. His mother, my grandmother, it was a Seke, and he told me what was going on. They had settled in Kolozsvár, in Cluj-Napoca, that's not in the secular land, that's farther to the west, the capital of the territory of Transylvania. And he would go often to visit his uncle there in the summertime. He was born and raised in Budapest, but he would go there often to visit. And he told me what was going on. He never had a bad word to say about a Romanian. He just told me what he was witnessing. Pressure to Romanianize, pressure for the Hungarians to leave. There were actually, I don't know if you know this, Gabor, but there were actually, the Romanian government actually encouraged officials from Brazil to go to Transylvania and try and convince people that Brazil's a really great place to go to if you want. I don't know if you know this story. Yeah, okay, well, this is what I was told anyway. And so there was pressure. And then he said, there were whole areas where it was really only Hungarian. Why do you have to give all that up? And I thought, that's not okay. And I thought, well, if I can ever do something about that, not that I, have any power, but if I can ever make some kind of a little difference, I'll gladly do it, because I hate injustice of any kind, whether it's a little black child, 5 years old, who's never been treated well by anyone else, or Hungarian Transylvanians, or the Uyghur in northwestern China. That's all not okay. This is a very, very sick world. And in some ways, I'm glad my dad isn't around to see it, because he would have just shaken his head. And if I ever write another book, I only put this out, I'm not selling it. This is the book I wrote on the Romanian Revolution. This is the DVD I did with Duna TV about the Romanian Revolution. And the reason why I'm saying that is I played a small role in the background of what happened. And I'll briefly tell you, and I'll show you then this iconic investigative report. It's 15 minutes long, and then I'm done. I was involved in the Hungarian Human Rights Foundation. This is a group set up in New York City, and I had heard about it by a gentleman called Tibor Ferenci. He was a restaurateur in Toronto. He had a restaurant called the Csarda. He was a settler from Transylvania. And I once went to lunch there. It's November 1984. And he says, you should talk to Laszlo Hamos in New York City. And he says, because he's doing stuff against Ceausescu, the Romanian dictator. And I said, well, it's interesting, because in May of next year, 1985, will be the World Human Rights Conference. All the countries from all over the world will be there. And I was just thinking, wouldn't it be interesting to have a big demonstration there against Ceausescu and against, at that time, Czechoslovakia, because they had imprisoned Miklos Durai. He was the leader at the time, unofficial leader of the Hungarians in Slovakia. And he was imprisoned because he had set up a petition campaign because Czechoslovakia wanted to close every single Hungarian school. And he said no. And because he created a lot of news out in the West, he was imprisoned for that. In any case, so we did demonstrate, and I went with Hamos, and we did a number of other things. And then in 1989, the brother of Laszlo Tőkés, the member of parliament in Brussels, and the man who kick-started the Romanian Revolution outside his church on December 15th, 1989, Timișoara in Hungarian. His brother had defected 20 years earlier to Montreal, and so we had been doing demonstrations with the Montreal group, things like that. He phones me one day, it's early February 1989, and he says, there are two journalists, Canadians, in Montreal. They would gladly do a secret television interview with Laszlo Tőkés in Timișoara. So this is now February 1989. So it's 10 months before the revolution starts. And I said, that's fantastic. They're not Hungarian, not Romanian. Nobody can accuse us that we're using favoritism because we have a couple of Hungarian journalists going in. They're Canadian. He said, they're French Canadian. I said, even better. And they would go in. We have a group in Székesfehérvár in Hungary who would smuggle in the cameras, the tapes, everything. We're in and out. And then we'll give it to the West. I said, let's do it. I said, how much does it cost? He says, $3,000. I said, well, we've got 1,000. We'll give you 1,000 from Toronto. I said, how much do you have? And he said, 1,000. I said, okay, then go to Hamosh, you get the other 1,000, it's done. He goes, no, Hamosh won't give. I said, what? He won't give. He says he doesn't believe in it. He says these two reporters have never done anything like that in their lives before. They don't speak either Romanian or Hungarian. It's a waste of money. So I said, let me try. So the next morning, I called in sick. To this day, I'm guilty about it. I feel guilty about it. I said, I'm going to the dentist. I waited till 9 o'clock. I look at the little clock in my little bachelor apartment, and I phone him. And we had it out. We had it out for 45 minutes. And I convinced him in the end, give the 1,000. In the worst case scenario, we lose 3,000, but it's worth it. What could happen from this? And I only thought that there would be a TV interview where the world sees what's going on. I didn't know that it was going to start a chain reaction of other things. And so anyway, he agreed. Poor Régent Roy had to take the train from Montreal all the way down to New York City and sign in front of him, but actually Hamosh gave more than 1,000. And then they went. And it worked. 2 cameras, 2 30-minute tapes each, at 10 o'clock in the morning on Monday, March 20th, in and out. 2 couriers take off to different border destinations. And then Régent Roy and Michel Claire said to each other, you know what, that was easy. Let's go up to Kolozsvár, to Cluj, and interview Turkish's father. And that's where things went really bad. Everyone got caught. But the tapes went out. In the end, because of the interview that was broadcast around the world on 2020, on ABC television, etc., Turkish was given the deadline of December 15th to leave his church, or he'll be taken out, and to go into internal exile in the village of Menu in Hungarian, in central Transylvania. He refused. And on December 15th, he didn't know what was going to happen. The cleaning lady knocks on his door. 7 o'clock in the morning, she goes, look out the window. He had his apartment in their church. He looks out the window. There's about 300 people. It becomes 10,000 by about, it becomes 5,000 by about 2 in the afternoon. Motz, the mayor, comes over. He says, get rid of these people. And he goes, I told them to leave. Get rid of them now. And they wouldn't go. And then he also thought that there were people who were provoking people in the crowd and stuff like that. Next day was 10,000. That's when they attacked. It was a bloodbath. Military and the Securitate, the Romanian secret police. It was a bloodbath. It spread across the city, spread across the country. In the end, the Romanian Revolution worked. Laszlo Turkish, beaten up, bloodied, put under arrest, everything. His wife also, horrible. Today he's a member of Parliament, the European Parliament, and 10 days after that revolution started, it was Ceausescu whom they finished. And I always got suspicious, why did this revolution work? I did an interview with Miklos Németh, and we can play that now. Let me just turn this on. Whoops. Miklos Németh was Hungarian prime minister during the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. He opened the border with Austria in the summer of 1989 in order to allow thousands of East Germans in Hungary to leave for the West. In this exclusive interview, he reveals his secret deal with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, how he dealt with a possible military attack by Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu, how Hungarian Secret Service agents helped topple him during the Romanian Revolution, and how they protected the man who sparked the revolution that started in Timișoara, Reformed Church minister Laszlo Turkish. Let's start with your relationship with Mikhail Gorbachev. Shortly after you became Hungarian Prime Minister in November of 1988, you found out that indeed, on Hungarian soil were stationed Soviet nuclear warheads. And you also wanted to have your country more free. You wanted to get rid of the Soviet soldiers, for example. And so you decided that you would go to Moscow, and you went there on March 3rd, 1989. Tell us about that conversation.
Gorbachev and I spoke for 2 hours, and then came his famous statement, Miklos, as long as I'm sitting in this chair, we will not repeat what happened in 1956. But there's one thing I ask of you. You can't even write in the Socialist Party's committee minutes about your request to me for the removal of Soviet troops, nor your request about removing nuclear warheads. Please don't make my negotiations with the Americans in Geneva and Vienna regarding reducing armaments any more difficult than they already are. And so he offered his hand like this, and I shook hands with this man. And so the key question for us until the end of 1989 was this:
az volt a számunkra, hogy ez a window of opportunity, ez a pici lehetőség.
how long would it last? As long as that man sat there? Could we count on his word? And if we were toppled, what would happen next? Everything would have been different. So I was constantly testing Gorbachev's statements to see how stable his position in that chair really was. And when I flew home, I ordered my border guards to prepare dismantling the Iron Curtain at Rajka.
You believed very much in Gorbachev and in his word, yet you were also concerned how long he would stay in power. You had your people in Moscow analyze the situation. You had agents there too. Tell us how that worked. What were you looking for, and how did your people, and tell me about your people, what did they do?
This was called...
The name of this game was the bribery.
How would we be able to bribe certain wives of Politburo members and then the Politburo members themselves? We had our ways. 6 cartons of tantalizing Tokai wine, 6 kilograms of Pick brand salami, Gyulai brand sausages, fresh fruit if need be. All we first had to do was just set the bait for 1 or 2 wives of Politburo members. Then our embassy would call in the other guests, like the Politburo members themselves. And after a few vodkas, they became pretty talkative. Back in April of 1989, I was already getting warnings that Gorbachev was being severely criticized by his own Politburo members because of his policies of perestroika and glasnost, among other things. So I really had to monitor the situation. But yes, I did trust Gorbachev, just like I trusted German leader Helmut Kohl, who in turn trusted me.
You were getting very good information from Moscow, weren't you? I mean, this was top information. Are you allowed to talk about who was supplying the information for you?
The ambassador, who unfortunately has since died. His name was Sándor Gyurka. God rest his soul. He got extra funding from me so that he could make all of this happen, and he was only to report to me.
I also want to talk to you about something else I found. You know, I've been researching at various secret police archives, and I was also at the Hungarian secret police archives, and I came across a document. I believe you're familiar with this a little bit. It's called T3/89, page 235, and it's dated December 1st, 1989. It was actually a cable from Bucharest called number 9081 to Comrade Lang, from Comrade D49, and it says that, and I quote, translating in English now, in the summer, and this is about Romania in 1989, 7 500-kilometer long-range missiles were transported to the Florești military barracks about 9 kilometers from Cluj-Napoca, which is a city in central Romania. The Chinese-built rockets came into Romanian possession using Arab middlemen. Our man there believes that they are meant to destroy factories and nuclear power plants, and the target is presumably Hungary. And this is the document here from the Hungarian secret police files. You and I know a little bit about this and the background. How did you react when you heard about this?
Romania had been constantly threatening us. In July of 1989, I took part at the last major Warsaw Pact meeting for political leaders, which was in Bucharest. To this day, I am proud of the fact that Romanian leader Nicolae Ceausescu called me Mr. Everyone else he called comrade, but for him I was Mr. He was practically foaming at the mouth when he announced at the commencement speech that events in Poland, and especially in Hungary, were threatening proletarian internationalism, that we were undermining, imagine, undermining the power base of the Communist Party leaders, and that this would lead to chaos. He then turns to Gorbachev to make his suggestion that there should be another Warsaw Pact summit before the autumn to discuss the situation of the two countries in question.
ahol ennek a két országnak az ügyét tárgyalják meg.
We knew about his plans and about every threatening step. Our head of military intelligence implemented the necessary countermeasures. If the Romanians were to launch the missiles, and they were technically capable of that, unfortunately, then missiles would have landed on both sides of the border and would have surely led to human tragedies.
Because the main goal would be to hit the nuclear power facility at Paks.
Yes.
It could have been a nuclear catastrophe in Central Europe.
That's absolutely correct. But we did everything militarily. If the missiles were launched, we would have already shot them down in the air. So I was well informed about Romania. In fact, Ceausescu's threats were in vain, because as long as Gorbachev didn't back him up, Ceausescu was just blowing in the wind, as they say. His was an unlikely pipe dream. But even with Gorbachev keeping his word, Ceausescu wouldn't let up. He started pestering Gorbachev on the phone. You can read about this in Gorbachev's archives. They're already public. Gorbachev asks him, "What do you mean, Nikolai? What do you want to suggest? That we send in the tanks like in 53, 56, and 68? Is that what you think, that tanks are the solution?" I just wanted to do your job, Nikolai. You're responsible for the Romanian people. But Ceausescu still wouldn't let up. He wrote a letter to Gorbachev. Then Gorbachev thought it over and made a copy for me to read. And so what was our relationship with Gorbachev based on? Mutual trust. What was our interest together with the Poles? We wanted Gorbachev to help us with our political situation. And we in turn supported him. But we only had about a year, because not long after he lost his power base and was placed under house arrest while on vacation in the Crimea.
I just want to go back briefly to this document. This is the first time this has become public about the threat of a rocket attack against allegedly the Hungarian nuclear facility in Paks, which is very near Budapest. Not just could it have been a tragedy, Europe could have been close to war. How did you deal with this pressure on you and with the fact that you had a hostile country as a neighbor?
Hungary used every means possible to make sure that Ceausescu's regime would topple. So should the regime of Miloš Jakeš of Czechoslovakia and the regime of Todor Živkov in Sofia. It was in our interest and in the interest of the Poles and Gorbachev's. We were all united on this and agreed to it, that we have to undermine the very foundations of these regimes. So when the People's Revolution sparked by Laszlo Tőkés against the Ceausescu regime started, from that point on I knew that it spelled the end of Ceausescu. I just didn't know that they would execute him. And so, after allowing the East Germans to leave Hungary in 1989, this was the year's second biggest political event for me, eliminating the Ceausescu regime. The Romanian secret police, the Securitate, did try to stop it. The key question, though, was which way would the army go? It hesitated for a bit, and Romanian General Victor Stanculescu did shoot early on at demonstrators in Timișoara, but when he felt the tide turning, he switched sides. And who arranged for the Ceausescu's couple's trial and execution? Who arranged all that?
Hozza össze az egészet?
Stankulescu.
Stankulescu.
And in fact, the Hungarian Secret Service agents were able to give him and his military important information about where the Securitate was. Can you talk about that a little bit?
A mozgása a Securitate
We were
csapata
capable of monitoring the movements of the Securitate units and eavesdropping on their conversations. We passed on the information to General Stankulescu.
és ezek
Maybe the less said about that, the better.
felé továbbítani. Legyen elég ennyi.
Also, you didn't just save people's lives, and you didn't just save people, Laszlo Tőkés's life once. There was another way you saved his life because you had people watch over him. Again, people from the Hungarian Secret Service, from the military side. He didn't know that until recently, and he was very impressed. How important was that? Were those group of agents looking after him?
Azok a legprofibb.
They were the best professionals, personally handpicked from the head of intelligence, who then regularly rotated them.
Főnökük által.
There were altogether about some 20 agents who were rotated every 2 to 3 days in Timisoara so that they wouldn't raise suspicions or get
El
recognized.
ne ismerjék, nehogy gyanús legyen. Szinte
And it was
két-három
very
napig
important to
cseréltek.
prove to ourselves that we were capable of defending a man who was on the same side as us in the opposition, but carrying out his duties on Romanian soil. Did we also need Romanian help, such as General Stankulescu's support? Definitely. And so it became a successful mission. I'm still proud of it today.
Ma is büszke vagyok rá.
Finally, what's it like for you now, 25 years after some of the most amazing things in the history of the world happened here and in this region? What's it like for you to look back and know that what happened and the role you played?
Senki nem tudta 89.
Nobody knew back in 89 that by Hungary opening its border, it would lead to the fall of the wall in Berlin 3 months later.
Senki nem tudta, hogy
Nobody knew that 1 year later, in 1990, the two Germanys would reunite in October, changing the face of Europe and history.
Németország egyesül októberben. És ez
Nobody knew that in 91,
Európa
the Soviet Union would cease to exist, and that there would be a bloody war in the Balkans in 1992.
92-ben egy véres háború folyik a Balkánon.
There are still smoldering issues,
Parázs alatt szunnyadnak
but
indulatok,
as a member of the EU in Europe
de
and NATO member,
Európában,
I can say with pride,
Európai Unió tagjaként és a NATO tagjaként
I am happy that it was myself and the government I led who took the first steps in going in the right direction.
a jó irányba.
I want to thank you for this conversation. Thank you. Congratulations, by the way.
You are more than welcome.
Thank you.
He asked me, he talked to the Hungarian Secret Service the day after the interview. I knew I was going to get a call. He told me much more, actually. This was the third of 3 interviews. After the first one, he told me how many people were in each team that monitored Tőkés László. They were very close. They saved his life numerous times. The Securitate knew something was wrong because things weren't happening like they had planned. Now, I can't go into some details. But I've been asked not to say the exact number of people in each of the teams. And I said, why? What's the difference whether it's 3 or 7 or whatever? And they said, because these people, many of these are still alive, and they could be traced. I said, okay, fine. So I changed the number in the book by 1 person. But I did expect, for about 3 months, as I was walking the streets of Budapest, that a black sedan would drive by me, would stop, and 2 men would come out and say, Szőci Árpád, tessék befáradni. It never happened. So it's fairly liberal here. I mean, I'm fine with it all. Anyway, I'm sorry. I thought maybe you'd see this iconic interview because it meant a lot for Deutsche Welle. It was a world exclusive. And thanks for your patience. And I tried to do a little bit here. Thank you. Oh, and by the way, I know Gabor since 1986. We met in Sao Paulo. My father had come back from the Hungarian Congress in Cleveland in '85, and he said, I met a Hungarian businessman. He's from Transylvania. He's built up all the car factories in South America. His name is Istvan Zolchak. And I told him about what we're doing, and he's doing the same thing. And he said, tell your son he's welcome to come and see me in Sao Paulo. I'll look after him. So I said, okay, I'll come. And then I met him, and he had Gabor and other people meet with me, and we had a great time. Thank you. I'll clean up later.
Okay, I asked my friend Keve Pop to be the next one to speak to us.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you, Melissa and the Danube Institute for having the opportunity to share our story, our adventure, how we came about to come here. I myself, I was born in the US, grew up in France, and served in the US Marines after being accepted to the US Naval Academy, served 6 years. Of course, like all great bureaucracies, with my English, my French, my Hungarian, and a little bit of German, they sent me to the Pacific, where Chinese, Korean, Japanese would have been more useful. However, I didn't complain, because to go to the Pacific meant we lived in Hawaii. So I got a free trip to Hawaii and lived there for 7 years while at the courtesy of the US government. So it was a great time. And after I finished my MBA, I said, well, what do you do with an MBA? My brother was already in Vienna, and he said, why don't you come to Austria or Hungary? Everything's changing. And indeed, in the 1990s, it was like living a Hemingway novel. Hungary, Budapest was awesome. Everything was happening in Budapest. There was hope, there was change, every day was something different. And me speaking Hungarian, I was able to perform my journalistic activities, listening to the Hungarian politicians and business people in Hungarian. I didn't need a translator. All the other journalists, they had a translator. I could listen in Hungarian and then wrote it in English for The Economist. And then I came over to Hungary for 1 year. And here I am 25 more years later, I'm still here. So sometime to annoy my real conservative friends, I usually say, I understand the Russians. Great country, beautiful women, great food, who wants to leave? So, well, the Turks, they stayed here for 200 years, so.
They had no choice but to.
So anyway, it's an interesting story. How does one come home or go home? Every time I would leave, go back to visit my lately parted mother in the US, I would go home to the US, and when I was in the US and I had to come back to Hungary, I would come home to Hungary, I'd go home to Hungary. I was always going home, so I'm going in a circle. And actually the circle does play a great part in my life. I never planned on coming to Hungary. As I said, I came over for 1 year to help my CV. Building democracy sounds good. And I was always going back to the US. However, I was extremely fortunate. I met my wife, who's sitting in the back over there. And she's also from outside of Hungary. And then I have 2 great children. My daughter's over here. And my son is at home probably doing his homework, preparing for his érettségi, or he's just watching television. I don't know. He keeps saying he studies a lot. So how does one relate? You know, why come? You know, people keep saying, well, why did you come back? And here we split hairs. I never came back. I never left. So I didn't come back. I came here. I made a choice to come to Hungary. Because I wanted to build, I wanted to leave my mark. I thought that, like all people living outside of Hungary, we all thought that the things holding Hungary back was the Russians. So when the Russians leave, a little bit of training, and Hungary will be at the level of Switzerland in a matter of years. So I came over here to help Hungarians become Switzerland type of economies. Well, since then, we have discovered that there's a whole lot more for society to grow than just having the invader leave. And Hungary's tumultuous history is an indication on how difficult it is for this society to mature into something maybe greater, or maybe it doesn't need to mature in something greater. It is fine as it is now. So, just like John said earlier, I think very well put, there's always bad things in the microcosmos, in the micro time, but over history, history will tell. So, don't want to politicize over here, but the conservativeness is, I think, what got me into one of the best universities in the U.S., which is the U.S. Naval Academy. It got me a great education, and I got to serve in the best armed forces in the world, the U.S. Marine Corps. And once a Marine, always a Marine. I am extremely proud to be a Marine, and I try to live by the ethos of Marines, which is proper ethics, do your job, and always be true to God, to your country, and to yourself, and to your family. So, and that's what I try to bring to Hungary, and I keep preaching that. So, am I at home? I keep telling people, home is, we're the descendants of Attila, the Hun, and home is where we plant our flag, our tent. You are at home where you feel at home, and I feel at home in the U.S. when I visit my brothers and sisters, when I visited my mom. I feel I go home to Paris when I go to Paris. For me, Paris is my hometown, and I'm at home in Budapest. So home is a feeling which could bring us to the next level, what is being a Hungarian. And Gábor has been witness to this as he was helping in many South Americans to get their Hungarian nationalities. People that have not spoken, don't know Hungarian, but they feel something, they feel a bond. And they feel Hungarian and they got their citizenship. Just last week, I met two young girls in their 20s, and they're here, they kicsit beszél magyar. They're learning Hungarians. One is from Brazil, the other one's from Argentina. And they're with the Rákóczi program, and they want to learn Hungarian, and they feel an affinity. So I think our Hungarianness, if we can call it like this, magyarság, as Gábor said, is a source of strength. And for me it was. At the U.S. Naval Academy, where study is very difficult, where the first year is about trying to push you out of the academy, for me being a Hungarian was I was always taught, Keve, you cannot pick a fight unless they insult your mother or your country. I said, well, what's my country? They say something bad about France. You know, when you're a 10-year-old, you think you're French because you speak French. I had an American passport, so I thought I was also American. No, they said if they insult Hungary, then you can fight. So, okay. So I wasn't allowed to fight except for these two reasons. And that's, of course, it's funny now, but it does put its imprint on you. So at the end of the day, we felt Hungarian wherever we were. Hungarian is what was a common thread. And when I graduated from the academy, if you remember, if anyone saw pictures of the U.S. Naval Academy graduation, is when everybody's in white and we throw our hats up in the air. My hat had a Hungarian flag in it. Well, some people thought it was Italian, but anyway, and my stepfather at the time even had caught it on camera. So, what is being Hungarian? So, Hungarian is, I would say, a state of mind. Hungarian is just like in the Friends of Hungary Alapítvány or foundation. It's about the feeling. Frido at the beginning, as you arrived here, he parted. It's the music, it's the dance, it's the language, it's the poetry. And although my daughter will hate me for this, for us in the U.S. it was learn Hungarian, speak Hungarian. And that's why we did the Scouts in Washington, D.C. which I started in 1974, I think. And to my great joy and pride, they are still working, and all the young Hungarians, people from Hungary or people born over there, are still going in, are still in Scouts. And I have to say that Scouting was the other vehicle with which we were able to keep our Hungarianness. However, for my daughter and my kids, it was learn English. So, like Arpad did a 15-minute sketch, I gave my daughter 2 minutes to say a couple of words. Well, what is it like to be the daughter or the kid of somebody who's American, who's at home in French, who's Hungarian as well? So what are we? Are we American? Are we Hungarian? Are we French? What are we? So Edouard, 2 minutes. Speak loud. Here's a.
So, hi, I'm the earlier mentioned daughter, Edouard. And people often ask me, so your dad is American, so do you consider yourself as American? Do you speak English at home? First of all, my dad is a Hungarian who was born in the US, and no, we don't speak English at home, we speak Hungarian, which is kind of reverse because Papa always tells us, oh, you have to learn English, speak English. Thanks. And honestly, I myself often asked him why he never spoke in English to us. And his answer is because it's not his love language. His love language is Hungarian. It's not natural for him to speak to his children in English. So my brother and I consider ourselves as true Hungarians with a little spice of American.
And that's why I say we have come full circle. My grandparents had to flee Hungary because my grandfather would have been hung for his part in the resistance against the Russians. My mother was 6 years old. My grandfather, from my father's side, was imprisoned by the communists for a couple of days, and he got the message that it might be a better idea to leave. They met in Washington, D.C. My mother, I was born in Washington, D.C., grew up in France, and 2 generations later, after my grandparents had to leave, the great-grandchildren were born in Hungary, and this is why I say the circle has come a full circle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was absolutely great. And before I call my next friend, I would like to ask you, do you have any questions to either Arpad or to Keve? We can have a short questions and answers session now. Yes?
Today is Arpad Day, so happy birthday, or happy names day.
Okay, happy names day to Arpad today.
My daughters follow that, I don't. But we need it.
Any other questions?
Of course.
No questions? Okay, so I will call my friend Baron Anta Liptai.
Dear President O'Sullivan, ladies and gentlemen, my deepest thanks to the Danube Institute for the kind invitation permitting me to be here with you. Allow me first to share thoughts on issues occurred in Hungary. To remember helps to comprehend the impact of past events, as well as to better understand why restoring our values is so important for us. In addition, I will give brief information on my family and violence suffered by ancestors of mine, and few details on my life far off and in Hungary. Almost half a century of communist dictatorship changed Hungary. The nation's sovereignty ceased. Continuity of the historical Hungary, of its ancient constitution, of its traditions and culture collapsed. A very vast majority of Hungarians were forced to live under the dictate of the state, unwillingly handcuffed to a totalitarian and oppressive regime. Private property and initiative were state issues. Hungary's national identity was hurt. Hungarians lived in deep uncertainty, isolation, and constant fear. Here in the nation of Virgin Mary, the nation of saints, a God-denying, intimidating, sinister gang ruled the country. Those who fled in time from the prevailing very turbulent circumstances lived in host countries as the situations allowed. Where conditions permitted, Hungarian communities were created to promote our traditions, to keep the Hungarian spirit alive. The Hungarian Revolution of 1956 was a loud call out, a demand heard on every corner worldwide. The credibility of communism saw its end. The free world got aware of what Marxist-Leninist ideology is capable to do. Many tens of thousands of Hungarians had to sacrifice their life in order that the world could finally realize how communism oppresses and tyrannizes human lives. 33 years after, in the perspective of Christ's entire lifespan, on 1989, Hungary started its resurrection. The very loud cry of 1956 was not in vain. Freedom started again 33 years after 1956. As the Soviet army left the country, Hungary's sovereignty was again in place. One can feel now the positive impact of freedom. Hungary withdrew from the Warsaw Pact and Comecon, became member of NATO and the EU. Christian values are returning to our life. The policy preserving national values is gaining support far above of the left globalist and liberal intentions serving foreign interests willing to diminish our sovereignty. We can be, and we are indeed very proud of the reborn of Hungary taking place now. Hungary's historical link to Christian values, firmly recognized and reaffirmed by the current government, is securing a place of dignity and leadership for Hungary in the Christian civilization. The Danube Institute, as well as the Friends of Hungary Foundation, have already made important contributions to Hungary's renewal process, and I'm sure both institutions will keep on supporting worldwide recognition for Hungary's efforts strengthening its sovereignty. The Remigrates Visszidensek book is not only a good series containing very interesting and some very moving stories, beyond that is a great initiative supporting Hungary's renewal. The stories are proving that love for our homeland is deep in the heart and soul of those interviewed. we are happy here in Hungary. Some are keen to serve the nation. I'm sure that we all are willing to have the next generations living in a Hungary strengthened by hope, traditions, freedom, independence, sovereignty, and dignity, as it was along of our more than 1,000 years of old history, always attached to God. When starting my remarks, I indicated that I will also share a detail on my family and issues concerning some of my ancestors and of myself. My parents' families are both of the ancient Hungarian nobility, traceable since the first half of the 13th century. For communists, our class was to be wiped out. What actually almost occurred, but peers are around. Some of them already helping positive awareness on Hungary to increase. My grandfather's line was an entomologist. He remained and died here in Hungary. During World War II, when fierce combats were taking place in Széchenyi and surroundings, he was helping several hundreds of villagers with food and shelter in his castle. After 1949, he, my grandmother, and one uncle of mine had the great privilege to live in 2 tiny servants' rooms in their own but confiscated castle. My grandfather, mother's line, was a civil servant, culminating his career in 1942 as State Secretary for Education and Religion. Due to his background, he and my grandmother were deported to Kápolnásnyék, where both died consumed by the difficult circumstances. The first cousin of my grandmother's line was assassinated by the secret police in the library at his castle. His wrongdoing was having written against communism between 1945 and 1948. A cousin of my grandfather, mother's line, a distinguished diplomat, disappeared. Legends on his death are existing, but his corpse was never given to family members for burial. This type of very sad events were not rare in Hungary. In fact, there are not many families having experienced no consequences under communist terror. Before ending World War II, my parents fled on foot to Holland, where we have relatives. I was born there in a small water castle as Hungarian. In 1949, after the communist regime deprived us from the Hungarian citizenship, my parents decided to move forward where communism won't reach us. We landed in Chile, in Finis Terre. I grew up there speaking for decades only Spanish. As I was creative, advertising became my profession. I learned by doing. I heard Allende promising the dictatorship of the proletarians. It was an option that fortunately the majority of Chileans with deep Christian background did not accept. The example of Cuba and of all of the countries at that time forced to assist a security belt of the Soviet Union was enough to stop Allende's intention. In the 80s, I served as diplomat for Chile in Vienna, in Bonn, and for a month in Bucharest, where I had an unwilling and not very pleasant meeting with Ceausescu's Securitate. And then I went back to Vienna again. In Vienna, close to Hungary, time to time I had the chance to know about what was happening here at that time. In occasions, information pieces reached me indicating that the Central Committee of the Communist Party was considering introducing transformations towards a more-party system, what was taking place end of 1989. When the opening to democracy was launched, I came here to stay. Promptly, I got my Hungarian citizenship back. The decree depriving my citizenship when I was only a 3-year-old child was declared null and void. Here in Hungary, I represented a German-French corporate communications agency until I structured my own PR firm, helping Western companies to launch and carry on its operations. Now, with my wife present here, since we are both retired, we are involved mainly in pro bono activities supporting religion, arts, and the environment. In 1994, together with Marquis Carlo Pallavicini and Laurent Beretsky, we created Pro Arte et Natura Foundation, PAN, aiming to support values neglected by communism. Our main purpose has been helping strengthening awareness on an extraordinary Hungarian, on Cardinal Joseph Mindszenty, Prince Primate of Hungary, whom I had the privilege to meet in Vienna, year 1974. Cardinal Mindszenty, as it is known, was brutally tortured and condemned for being loyal to God and to historical Hungary. In arts, the focus has been on Gyula Benczur, a fantastic Hungarian painter, as good as Rubens is. Gyula Benczur's art was banned by communism for having keynote scenes of Hungarian history as its main theme. Countless episodes occurring in our life encouraged us to undertake one very inspiring and stimulating task, namely the construction of the chapel honoring Our Lady of Sorrows at the top of the Sölle Hill in Benszurfalva, at the end of St. Anthony's votive Stations of the Cross, from where you can see far, far into the former highlands of Hungary. This task, supported also by many sponsors, is a supplication to God for reconciliation and peace. Many thanks for your kind attention. I wish you all a very blessed Christmas.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Baron. And now I ask my friend Frido Dipevin to speak to us.
Dear President, ladies and gentlemen, it's never lucky to be the last speaker before you can have your wines and sandwiches, but I'll do my best not to bore you. And by the way, I prepared in Hungarian, and here I found out that everybody's speaking English, so I will have to improvise a little bit, but that's okay. So on paper, I'm the least Hungarian, and nothing in my name reveals any source of Hungarian. And that's why I'm very proud that I'm in this book, in the first edition. And I'm also honored and grateful, and that is because the one who recommended me to be in that book recognized the Magyarság in me, which is on paper only 25%, but in reality is probably more. And my Hungarian grandmother always said, I don't know how the Lord, a Jóisten, did it, but you have more Hungarian genes than your brother, who is, so I got his part probably. My grandmother was raised in Marosvásárhely, and I'm a product of Trianon, because when that treaty was signed, my grandmother and her parents had to run away, because my grandfather had a certain position in town, and they had a double name, Éltető Zilahi, and the Romanians didn't like that. So in the middle of the night, they had to flee, and with some jewelry, they could survive for a couple of months in Budapest, and then the money was gone, and thanks to the so-called train, the children's train program of, I think, the Red Cross and the church, my grandmother was able to get some strength in the Netherlands. And she stayed there for the rest of her life. So as a girl of 13 or 14 years, she went to the Netherlands, not knowing the language, to foster parents. And the interesting thing is that she was considered a poor Hungarian refugee, although she came from a very good family, and that was during her whole life very difficult to accept. She was discriminated. Sometimes the Dutch even said that she was a poor gypsy girl, because Hungary, that's full of gypsies and paprika and pusta and so on. Especially in those days, they didn't know better. But she married a great Dutch businessman, and he has become my hero. Why is that? The parents of my grandfather did not like the idea of him marrying a poor Hungarian refugee, so they were against it. And he said, well, if you are against it, I still love the love of my life, then I go to Budapest and marry her there. And so he did. And I have a great respect for that. And they had a fantastic marriage. And my mother is half Hungarian, and so I'm only a quarter Hungarian. But during the summer holidays, we often visited Hungary, and I was touched by the beautiful Magyar Nóta, or more popular said, the gypsy music. And during the holidays at Lake Balaton, there was this one csárda, Mandula csárda, still exists. They don't have gypsy music anymore, but we went there all the time, and I was fascinated by the music. I didn't eat, I was only listening. And I have an interesting story about music and about the Magyarság, keeping Hungarians together, because sometimes we even crossed the border to our relatives in Marosvásárhely, and although it was very pleasant to stay in Hungary, it was very friendly, the atmosphere in the 70s and the 80s, we didn't feel any hostility. When you crossed the border to Romania, you felt an awful world coming to you. And there was one night that my relatives in Romania said, now we have enough of the suppression, and let's have some fun. And we were in a hotel, and they already knew then that I was playing the violin, and they said, let's make some music together. And then a relative had to stand at the door and watch whether there was any Securitate or Romanian watching us. And after closed doors, we were playing and singing Hungarian music, and it was very special. I will never forget that. But life went on, and I went to university in Amsterdam, and it was all okay, but I was missing something. And already during my studies, I came very often to Hungary to learn to play the gypsy music from famous Primások. And in 2001, I got the opportunity to start a job at ING Bank here, not knowing anything about the Hungarian banking industry, not knowing Hungarian yet, but I said, this is my chance, this will change my life. And I started working here. Didn't like the job that much, but it gave me some salary, and it taught me Hungarian. And then my real pleasure started when I started working as a headhunter with a Hungarian Dutch lady called Ilonka Jankovic. And then I knew I'm here to stay, because the headhunting business, which is my profession, was a great combination with my music. And the reason for coming to Hungary was not to build society or help support the Hungarians, but it was a very selfish reason. I wanted to learn to play the violin and be part of the music culture here. Nevertheless, in all those years, I think I have functioned in a way as a bridge between Hungary and, for instance, the Netherlands, because I now speak both language fluently, and my work is also about connecting these countries. So I am here to stay. I think it's, for me at least, the land of opportunities. I have everything that I can imagine here in Hungary, and it may sound strange, but after 2 days abroad, I already miss Hungary. And I think that makes me quite Hungarian, because this is a Hungarian illness to have the honvágy. And this is why I think I will stay here for the rest of my life. And wherever I can, I try to help the society, to also teach something about what I learned in the Netherlands, but I learn also a lot from the Hungarians in terms of warmth, hospitality, kindness, and last but not least, the music, which you will hear afterwards again. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Do you have any questions to Baron Antal or to Frido? Yes.
Good evening. Thank you very much. It was really a pleasure to listen to all of you. My name is Ben Sabauer. I'm myself a Visszidensek. I was living for 22 years in Germany, and now I'm back in Hungary since 10 years. I would be interested, Frido, about your year of birth. A little bit, the year of birth of you and your mother. The year of birth.
My mother?
No, Frido. I was asking Frido. When have you been born? Yes, yours and your mom's. Thanks.
My mother was born in 42. And you? In 72.
Mr. Liptai was, in English, and your family and your children, and where are they, and do they have the same kind of an affinity to Hungary than what you have described here?
It's quite a sad situation because of the distance. My children and grandchildren are not coming so often as I would like to that they come. But we communicate due to, we have the Skype and the WhatsApp and Viber, and we are absolutely connected, but not in Hungarian. I myself, I learned Hungarian when I was about 44. And I hope very much that my children will make at the end the same. Yes. Yes. Fire away.
Any more questions? Well, I would like to thank Orsi and the whole foundation. And I would like to ask John. John, where are you? Please. Thank you for the Danube Institute for giving us this opportunity.
Well, thank you very much. And Melissa is out of the room, but I really have to pay a tribute. She's now back. because this is the conference that she and you devised, and Ursula, and so I'm just the sort of the front man on this one, but it's been a very enjoyable occasion for me because I've been at someone else's conference in a curious way, and it's been a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed all of the contributions, and I'm sorry that Albert had to go earlier because I lived in Canada, in Toronto, for 3 years. And of course, I knew a number of the people that he was talking about. I mean, in Canada, that is. And would have liked to have discussed, for example, George Jonas, who was a great Hungarian poet and journalist, writer, author, librettist for operas and so on, and who left in '56, and chose Canada almost by accident. The queue outside the Canadian embassy was much shorter than the queue outside the US embassy. And when he was advised to go on it, he said, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know anything about Canada. And the guy, his Hungarian friend, said, oh, what is there to know? It's ruled by the Queen of England. And he said, well, he thought to himself, well, what does that mean? It probably means that the police are reasonably polite and that they don't make up the laws as they go along. So he chose Canada. I happened to be in his home when, ailing and not long before his death, the Governor-General of Canada arrived there to give him the Award of Canada, which is a real tribute. And it's a marvelous example of how an accident, accompanied by virtue and ability, can produce wonderful results. And that kind of story, I think, occurs with Hungarians a lot in the diaspora. And now, as a result of what you're doing, it can occur back in Hungary as well. And so this useful kind of cultural interpenetration between Hungarians at home and Hungarians abroad, I'm delighted that we have been able, with Ursula and others, to, in some measure, able to celebrate, and I'd like to thank you particularly for this event, and Melissa. And again, have a blessed and a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we hope to see you for other events next year. And this Friday, when we have our final event of the year, which is a debate and discussion roundtable on Brexit with Lord Lilly, who was a member of Lady Thatcher's and John Major's cabinet, former Deputy Prime Minister, George Shoflin, whom you all know, the Hungarian member of the European Parliament, and both very distinguished men, both very interesting minds, and dealing with a topic which I have to say has yielded more controversy than I could ever have imagined, and that continues. So thank you for coming. I look forward to seeing you again.
Music, maestro.
Thank you.